It's probably a futile thing to do, but let me see if I can defend the Catholics. I was thinking about this. So in Jeremiah it talks about, I think it's Jeremiah, one of the prophets. It warns against worshiping the Queen of Heaven, which has become one of the titles of the of Mary, Theotokos. I don't know if we have that title. We might for her. We call her Theotokos anyways, which means the God-bearer, the one who gave birth to God. Sometimes translated as the Mother of God. I don't know. But yeah, okay, I have to say that. So yes, she's the Mother of God. But his flesh, not his divinity, obviously. So what about that? What about the Old Testament saying don't worship the Queen of Heaven and prayers to Mary? Well, again, it's asking Mary to pray for you. Again, the prayer of the Rosary, the Hail Mary, is not worshiping Mary; it's asking her to pray for you. What about saying don't pray to the Queen of Heaven? Well, the pagans of Canaan had the different sex goddesses. There probably were virgin goddesses. Usually those are the goddesses of war too. It's kind of funny. And they had child sacrifice, burning their children alive. Molech, who's a god, I think he was. His name actually means violence. Sorry, couldn't stand door creaking. Well, for one, the heaven that the pagans speak of is not the heaven that we speak of. Well, some Christians have the wrong idea of heaven. Our heaven basically means God. Going back to God. The presence of God. This is heaven. Even in the Maccabees it talks about heaven. It says, and heaven came down and gave his divine will. Heaven talked to us and he spoke. So it's impersonal and personal. It's changing the impersonal to personal. And Mary's called blessed of all women. Now the pagans had different views on everything. People like to use the word, they say, oh, you're not monotheistic, you're panentheistic. Okay, first of all, it's a form of monotheism, and anyways, the word monotheism, I think is in the Bible, maybe in a Latin translation of it. It's, I don't know, maybe even Greek, I think. Theos, so yeah. But they're two totally different identities, and the title Queen of Heaven just got attached later on. And of course it is, even for the Roman Catholics, it's blasphemy and apostasy to worship the Virgin Mary. The Eastern Orthodox cringe when they hear words like co-redemptrix and co-mediatrix. We say that as equating Virgin Mary with Christ, and we think many of the things attributed to the Virgin Mary are incorrect. They're incorrect basically. Well, first of all, because they're invented. The assumption of Mary without her dying, and then some will argue, no, she did die, but she ascended. And, well, okay, then you're celebrating the Dormition. That's the same as we do. But the ascension without her dying is not anywhere. Her Immaculate Conception is no. Well, we don't have the same. We don't need to suspend her from original sin because there's no original sin for us. Because that was Augustine. It's too late. It's innovations. But I think it's appropriate. I don't think it's a wicked or evil thing to call her the Queen of Heaven. She's the most blessed among women, and the only one that has any female attributes is the Holy Spirit, and still he. Even though it's, if you read a Catholic text, it's always in the feminine. It's correct, because pneuma is feminine. So that's where that comes from. It's same thing as breath. It's kind of funny. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's like calling these people who people call the Messiah, or which weren't messiahs. Bar Kokhba wasn't Christ, and there have been other Christ figures. Oh, so you worship Christ? So what about this? And what about and start naming people? It's like no, wait, it's ridiculous. I think I'm going to do one on the defense of Christ too, because people get there was no all this stuff about him dying and rising. That was never prophesied. Well, they found a bunch of stones. There was a prediction of the Messiah. It was a different Messiah, but it said in 3 days rise and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that was circulating around for at least 100 years before Jesus was born. But as for the Queen of Heaven thing, I think when Protestants look at that, they get a real big shock out of it. They're like, wait, in the Old Testament, and that's where they started equating Isis and Mary, and they just borrowed the ISIS cult. No. If you were to strand people on an island, atheists on an island, and you were to let that run for about 1,000 years, they would wind up developing their own gods and goddesses, and you'd have a mother figure in there that was caring, because that's basic to humanity. We project our ideas on the divine. This is why the divine came down. It came down at Mount Sinai, and not in the form of Christ, but this is pre-Christ, and you see people crying and screaming and writhing in pain and gnashing of teeth to get away. There's a foreshadowing of hell for you right there. Being in the presence of God and truly hating it. And then with Christ, so what comes after Christ is the Holy Spirit moving through the world. So we have a different relationship with God, with heaven, after Christ. Even though I believe Christ's death was apocalyptic, was basically tearing back the veil and spread out through crack the cosmos, so that even those in the pre-Christian period should experience grace. But I think his energies went through everything, and therefore we could see past the veil to a small degree, like Paul says, through glass darkly. But we have a different relationship with the world. That's why when people pick up the Old Testament and start to put that away. I don't need it here. That's for the church recognizing themselves in the role of that. And of course they have to take it metaphorically or allegorically, because it's a past event that's not going to happen again. And yes, we believe in cyclical time, but we also believe in linear. And as David P. Witham correctly said, it's like a spring. It's like a spiral. But I believe more than that. It's almost like a cone-shaped spiral. I believe it's going towards something, or maybe projecting out, or maybe doing both. But the energies of God have been granted to His creation, and they permeate through His creation. I absolutely believe that's why I say that God made man in His own image, and I say that yes, it's the soul, it's the spirit of man that is in the image of God. That God does not, obviously the Father does not have a flesh body like this, and Christ was, or the Logos was pre-existent. but not the Christ, who is in the form of man. Who's, well, not even in the form of, was man, was fully man, 100% God, 100% man. But I do believe that the fact that we have the nous, the thing that makes us human, that does permeate out and actually change us physically. The spiritual affects the physical. This is where I doubt every bit of Gnosticism. This is where Docetism flies out the window for me. Because they say, well, the physical can't affect the spiritual. Okay, so I can go out and murder people, and that means nothing. You could rape someone, and it means nothing. Oh, you're just too attached to your carnal self. That's what the Gnostic Jesus would say. Oh, they're just too attached to the carnal. That woman shouldn't feel bad about being raped because she's too attached to the carnal. I mean, read the sayings of Thomas. It's absolutely despicable. It falls back into Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. You wind up blaming the victim. But yeah, I think it's totally appropriate. I think you have to wind up explaining stuff to people. But then again, nobody can just pick up the Bible. See, it's so plain, stupid. It's right there. You have to go by this. That's letterism. That's not even literalism. That's just ridiculous. I have the same name as Joseph Stalin. Can people say, oh well, in 100 years, oh well, how can you say that anything good about that person? It's two wildly different concepts, and they're meaning two different things. One is praying for the rain to come down, and or some sex goddess, or a different type of virgin in heaven that's warlike, or even if there wasn't any war, they still accepted with a pantheon of gods, and she probably gave birth to other gods. And Mary is the only human being to give birth to the Christ, to God incarnate. And she's unlike anything in paganism because it is only an account of a woman giving birth to the one God. We call her more spacious than the heavens because that which the heavens could not contain, heavens meaning the sky, the universe, could not contain, was contained in her womb. Which is another point on this little side point, which is I get irritated with Protestants. I will say, when I talk to them, they say, if I say Theotokos, they say, what's that? I say the Blessed Virgin Mary. Oh, you're a Catholic? I say, why can't you say Blessed Virgin Mary? That says it in the Bible. So, I don't know. I don't really like standing up for Catholics, but it's needed a lot of times because the parts that the Protestants many times attack them on fall on our ground too. That I mean, yes, there's a lot of innovations in the West, but and then again, I don't know if we've ever called her Queen of Heaven. It's possible. Again, different context, different connotation, different. One's a person, one's a goddess. Totally two different concepts and everything. So. And I think that the Christians who named her this were probably the poor and the peasants. I don't think they were. I think this was a thing out of affection. I don't think it was them reading the Old Testament and trying to say, let's piss off God. No. Had they known that was one of the titles, they probably would have never given it. But then again, in the Latin West, there was many people who didn't read the Bible. Why should they? They're Christians. I know that's a shock to people, but I'll defend the Catholics on that too, about not reading the Bible, but to a point, because I think we see the faultiness in the West where people start worshiping the Bible as an idol, and I think that's wrong. Then again, it is our guide. It's not, well, I shouldn't say guide, but it is a part of the tradition. It is a vital connection to our understanding of Christ. And it's a teaching tool to weed out heresy. So, all right, peace to you. May God save Serbia and Syria. And pray for the Christians in Egypt. And thank you for your prayers. I don't know if we have that title. We might for her. we call her Theotokos anyways, which means the God-bearer, the one who gave birth to God. Sometimes translated as the mother of God. I don't know. But yeah, okay, I have to say that. So yes, she's the mother of God. But his flesh, not his divinity, obviously. So what about that? What about the Old Testament saying don't worship the Queen of Heaven and prayers to Mary? Well, again, it's asking Mary to pray for you. Again, the prayer of the Rosary, the Hail Mary, is not worshiping Mary; it's asking her to pray for you. What about saying don't pray to the Queen of Heaven? Well, the pagans of Canaan had the different sex goddesses. There probably were virgin goddesses. Usually those are the goddesses of war too. It's kind of funny. And they had child sacrifice, burning their children alive. Molech, who's a god, I think he was. His name actually means violence. Sorry, I couldn't stand the door creaking. Well, for one, the heaven that the pagans speak of is not the heaven that we speak of. Well, some Christians have the wrong idea of heaven. Our heaven basically means God. Going back to God. The presence of God. This is heaven. Even in the Maccabees it talks about heaven. It says, and heaven came down and gave his divine will. Heaven talked to us and he spoke. This is probably a futile thing to do, but let me see if I can defend the Catholics. I was thinking about this. So in Jeremiah it talks about, I think it's Jeremiah, one of the prophets. It warns against worshiping the Queen of Heaven, which has become one of the titles of Mary, Theotokos.